Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kristen Dorr. I'm the Integro webinar moderator. If you're new to Integro, our webinar series, hello and welcome. Integro does monthly webinars. We keep them to 30 minutes. So this month, I have David Starkweather and Scott Burt on the line with me, and they're going to be talking about leveraging machine learning to auto-classify for better information governance. Scott is the president and CEO at Integro, and David is one of our senior consultants, and he has been on the ground working on projects that are doing just this. So before I let them take it away, I have a few quick notes for you guys. First, David and Scott do have polls for you guys today, so pay attention. Keep your eyes and ears open. Those are at the start of the presentation, so we'd really appreciate your feedback on those. And second, please feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation. You can do so in the sidebar, and David and Scott will answer your questions at the end. So with that, I will let you gentlemen take it away.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Hey, this is Scott Burt. Thanks for joining, everybody. We appreciate it. We have a great attendance today. A lot of people have registered, a lot of people have interest, and we welcome you, and we hope to add some value to your day. We pack a lot in a 30-minute time frame, so I don't think you'll have a lot of time to be bored here. We recently gave this presentation at the MER conference in Chicago in a 1-hour time slot. We cut out one section on people, which if you have questions on those things, we can do a separate call later with you if you'd like. And we're going to be providing you some, really the key thing is some tips and advice on the process so you can be successful. The promise and pitfalls, we have heard, I don't know about you guys, but I've been to legal techs and governance conferences for the last 15, 20 years. And for so many years, we've heard the repeated message from the, this experts that were saying there's just too much information for people to classify, and people don't do it consistently enough. Even if they do good for a while, they'll get into slack and only take the first classification, that kind of thing. So the promise is in auto classification, machine learning to read your emails and understand the context, and then to properly classify those messages to your records categories or whatever categories make sense for you. This isn't just about records by any means here. But then you would ask the audience, hey, who all is doing auto classification today? Auto classification of your email, of your file servers, things like that. And the answer was almost always crickets. Very few people were doing it. And those that have done it have a lot of times had frustrations, or it's ended in failure. I believe a lot of times the failure is because people didn't follow some of the tips and advice that we're going to be given here today. And also they came in with the wrong expectations. That, I just buy technology and install it, and presto, I'm going to hit the easy button and it's going to just process all of our content. So we're going to educate on what this thing all is and what it might mean for you and how you can use it. And by the way, you absolutely can use it. But before I say that, David has a poll with questions.
Yeah, so we just wanted to get a quick temperature of the room. As Scott mentioned, auto classification is getting a lot of attention these days, but it can be hard to separate fact from fiction on what it can and can't do for us. So we wanted to get your attitude towards auto classification. So if you go ahead and ring in here, is it A, tried and true, everyone's doing it? B, it's exotic and intriguing, we're curious to know more? C, it's risky and high maintenance, stay away from it? Or is it D, just pure fantasy, don't drink the Kool-Aid? So go ahead and, if you would, place your votes.
Awesome, guys. We have a good amount of voters already. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Perfect. I'm going to close the poll now and share the results.
Wow, it is pretty interesting how many, David, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but 87% have gone with option B. It's exotic and intriguing. We're curious to know more. And that's not a big surprise. And that's great, though. So let's proceed forward and go to the next slide here. Thank you.
So We've got some healthy skeptics in the room, and I think that's a good thing. Gartner just released a CIO survey this year, and that survey said that only 4% of CIOs have implemented any type of AI solution, while 46% of the CIOs said they had developed plans to do so. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic out there, but as Scott said, again, not a lot of experience with people actually doing it. So this is kind of what we wanted to walk through today, is to give you guys some of our hard-won lessons learned, if you will, on doing these types of projects. So we're going to talk about process, we'll talk a little bit about technology, and then at the end, we'll talk about some real-world case studies. There are people that are doing this and that are doing it successfully.
Excellent, thanks, David. So first off, what are we talking about? We're talking about machine learning, and by the way, you hear about it all the time now, AI and ML, and that, and there's a variety of technologies that can be used for auto classification. So I don't want to dismiss the rules-based, if from this person, so like the NARA has promoted for the federal government the capstone rules. Certain people save all their email, the other 90% of the people only save their records. Well, we're really talking here about machine learning, where it can read the context or the body of the message and make a determination if this email or this Word document or this PDF matches a category as you have defined your categories. So this is a machine learning, and it learns from by itself. You're not setting rules saying if this then that. You're saying, hey, here's 100 examples or some number of examples of, in pictures. This is what a dog looks like, and here's a whole bunch of pictures of what a cat looks like, and then the computer figures out how to recognize dogs and cats in the future. That's what we're talking about here for this presentation, is here's what a bunch of documents that go into the finance category look like, and here's a bunch for HR benefits and what those look like, and then the computer will automatically recognize those, a la dogs and cats. Let's go to the next slide, David. Now, what we have, David, you're up on this one here.
All right, so obviously, I guess if you guys are here, some of you are thinking about potentially doing an auto classification project. What would you say is your biggest obstacle to doing a project today? Is it A, resources, B, knowledge, C, budget, or D, none of the above? You just ring in one more time for us, that would be great.
You guys are getting your votes in super fast. Thank you. Leave it open for a few more seconds so we can get the majority. Awesome. We have around 80% of you guys have voted. I will close the polls and share the results.
And interesting here, it's showing resources and knowledge are the top two challenges, but budget's not. So I'm going to assume you all have budget, and now you just need to overcome the challenges of resources and knowledge. And hopefully we're helping today on some of the knowledge. So very interesting.
Yeah.
Go back to the slides there, and now we're going to jump into the process.
Yeah, so this is where we spend the bulk of our presentation. Let's talk about our top 10 tips for classification success. So the first one is, one, don't boil the ocean. So we all know we've got terabytes and in some cases petabytes of unstructured content in our organizations. It's on file shares in SharePoint, Exchange, or Box, or any other number of ECM repositories. And using auto classification to help clean up that data, that's an excellent use case. Trying to do it all in one project, that's not so excellent. So what we've found is it's really best to ramp up the adoption of the program by demonstrating success in several smaller projects first. So maybe you want to find all of your contracts or some type of intellectual property. So before you train the system to recognize all 300 of your records categories, focus on a narrow subset of your data first. And this will do a few things for you. One, it'll allow you to drastically reduce your implementation time because you won't have to spend as much time training the model. It'll allow you to demonstrate value relatively quickly. And it'll also give you a feel for what it takes to do this type of work and to do it well. And once you've got that under your belt, then you'll really be able to garner the executive support and the resources you'll need to tackle the big data. Number 2, don't expect perfection. So setting proper expectations with your stakeholders is critical. You will have misclassifications, and these are the false positives, the items that are incorrectly put into a category. And you're also going to have missed classifications, and these are your false negatives, the items that didn't get put into a category but should have been classified. So these classification models that we're working with, they're all built on statistical certainty. It's all about the math, so you need to figure out what confidence threshold you can live with. Is a 70% certainty acceptable, or do you require 80% or 90%? And there's some trade-offs you need to consider here, right, Scott, as you think about setting these thresholds?
Yeah, and to that point, let's learn more about this concept of recall and precision, and let's define it. So on the right, I've got a little graphic. We've got 3 different kinds of documents. We'll call them purple, yellow, and green. And currently, the way we've trained the model to do the auto classification, it's trained for high precision. Meaning, if you look at the purple net, if we want to call it that, it only has purple documents. So it's doing a really good job to not have other kinds of fish in the net, you might say, using a fishing analogy. And the same with the green. So again, that's high precision, but you'll notice that we didn't get all of the purple and green documents that were out there. And so that means we have a lower recall. And so this might, certain categories you might want to tune this way. And then if I click, David, go ahead and click and make the, look at there, look at that fancy animation. Now the purple is set for high recall and lower precision, because now we've got some clutter in there along with the purple documents. Go ahead and hit the next one for the green. You'll see the same concept applies. Now we've got high recall on both of those categories, but we know we're going to have, one way to think about it would be, we have over retention on that content that weren't records maybe, or weren't the intellectual property or the contracts. You've got some false positives, but we have a higher degree of confidence that we got most all, if not all, of the ones that were responsive. Hopefully that helps. I think that picture helps me anyway. Go ahead to the next slide, David. Human involvement is required. We hear about these cars, you know, Tesla, driving down the road, etc. But we also hear that you got to keep your hands on the wheel. But more importantly is what did it take for training the auto driving, or training the auto classification in this case, initially to get it so that it could do the work for us? Well, it took some effort. It took some effort from subject matter experts that might be from the departments that know their content and their documents and what qualifies. It's going to take some input from legal counsel, but probably also your outside legal counsel, depending on your use cases and your obligations. But it's nice to have that benefit of that outside expertise and their independent opinions. And then human logic and decision making needs to be applied by the business analysts that are putting together the model to optimize it for precision and recall, and which decisions to be made along the way, along the lines of our recommendations here. Next, David. So to that point, expect an upfront investment. You're not buying a software product from some software vendor and it's going to be magic. There are some neat products out there that do some neat stuff for you, but if you have it and it needs to match your records categories with your content, guess what? The vendors on the market don't have it pre-built to know your records categories, and they don't know your content, your acronyms, your product lines, things like that. So it does need to be personalized for you. And so you're going to be doing that with training samples, that getting as many of those purple documents to show it what purple looks like, etc. Human resources, people to review and scrub the content. David's going to talk more about what we mean by review and scrubbing in a moment. And higher accuracy rates cost more to achieve. As David said earlier, it's not going to be perfect. And the more perfect you want it to be, it's going to require some more investment of resources and time and money up front. And you also have that law of diminishing returns. We can make a lot of progress quickly, and then it gets additional incremental gains become to be a little more difficult. David?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's really two things that are going to make or break your classification project. And the first is your classification taxonomy, which we do a lot of data remediation and cleanup. So a lot of times our taxonomy is the records retention schedule, but it doesn't have to be that. But the point I wanted to make is that not all taxonomies lend themselves to successful classification. And the reason is this. Auto-classification works best when you've got mutually exclusive categories with very clear and distinct content. So finance documents, sales and marketing materials, human resource documents. These are very clear delineations in content. When you have vague and overlapping categories, it makes it harder for the classification engine to determine the correct categorization. So for example, we recently did a project where the customer had a category for training guides and they had another one for user manuals. Well, as the human training the machine, I couldn't tell the difference between these two categories, which leads us to something called overlapping intents. You want your taxonomy to look like these buckets here on the left. Now, if I asked you to put something into the pink container, that's something we could train most 3-year-olds to do, right? But if your taxonomy looks more like these teacups here, classifying something into the pink container becomes a lot more challenging and uncertain, and you're probably not going to get consistent results. So your overlapping intents reduce certainty. If a human's going to struggle to make the correct classification, the machines are going to struggle as well. Now, of course, this isn't ideal to strive for, and most of our retention schedules probably look more like the teacups. We've got 6 different categories just for contracts and 17 more categories for our finance documents. You can build a model to classify against the teacups, but just know that it's going to take a lot more upfront work to train the model, and you're probably not going to get as good as results. So be willing to be flexible with your taxonomy. It can be really helpful in classification projects to combine similar categories to improve your classification.
Yeah, David, it really can't be emphasized enough that this is one of the biggest things where, smart business decisions up front can have a huge impact on your time to benefit, your cost to benefit, and your resulting benefit.
Absolutely. Yep. So I said there were 2 things that could make or break your classification project. Your taxonomy is the first, data quality is the second. And this is where we see most companies fall down on their classification projects. It takes significant upfront effort and time and resources to collect these representative samples to train the model how to recognize your content. And this is going to be the longest task in your project plan on any classification project. And you really can't cut it short and still get credible results. And there's really a number of factors that make a sample a high quality sample, but someone needs to review these samples and look at them to make sure they are high quality. And a few things that make a sample high quality is it should belong to a single category. So you want to avoid the overlapping intents in your samples as well. So they look really more like these documents here on the left instead of the documents on the right. Your sample should contain recognizable keywords that you'd expect to find in the category. And these keywords can oftentimes help delineate between similar categories. And unless you're using some type of image recognition software, your samples need to be text-based. JPEGs, TIFF files, image-based PDFs that haven't been OCR'd, these really don't make good training examples because they don't contain any readable text that the classification engine can learn from.
Yeah, how many times have we run into that, David?
Quite a bit. Yep.
Supplement with rules where possible. I think that one's me again, right, David?
It is.
All right. So I mentioned earlier that we're talking a lot about the machine learning and having it use exemplary content to learn your content and your categories. There's a lot of rules first. So when we do a lot of file share cleanup. It goes by a lot of names nowadays. Sensitive data cleanup. We're moving to Office 365, and we only want to bring the good stuff, the valuable stuff that's being used, etc. Well, we can start off with rules based upon metadata. So age, type, location. So in defensible disposal on the file share cleanup projects, our first rules, our first ways to classify are always rules-based. We might look at the size of the files. You'll be amazed that you think, wow, we're paying a ton for storage. Chances are about 10 or 15% of your files are taking up 80% of your storage. And so guess what? Let's go look at the big files. And a lot of times there are duplicates there, or there are things that you don't need. They're install files for out-of-date software, things like that are just large. And you can make some easy business decisions based upon things, dates, how old it is. We look at CAM, created, accessed, modified date, things like that, size of the files, where it's at. If we're in the marketing department scanning their file share, and there's no records category for marketing longer than 5 years, say, and there's no legal holds going across any of the folks in the marketing department, well, guess what? Content older than 5 years old arguably doesn't need to be there. So you can look at that rule and reduce the amount of content you're looking at very quickly. The next one there, full text search and pattern matching. We can look for keywords, doing searches, proximity, things like that. And pattern matching is like social security numbers, 3 digits, -2, -4, things like that. Then we get to the machine learning, which is what we're talking about here. So think through your content, figure out your rules and policies, and then work your way down. Then let's process that content with the machine learning. Next, David. And David, by the way, I'll just remind you, we're at 7 minutes left right now, so we're going to keep moving along here. Make deletion a non-event. So some of you customers out there have never deleted anything, and you might have a 100-year-old company, but now you want to, and that is an event when you first start getting to that point where you start to delete content regularly. But I'll tell you what, it does happen. We implemented email management here at Integro in 2008, and it's a non-event. Our email is routinely deleted out of Kristen's and David's and my mailboxes, and nobody frets about it. We know that the transient content goes away and the records are kept, and it's not a problem. So make it a non-event in your processes, and have a good legal hold preservation system and process in place. That is very important. Next, David. So we've got 3 slides here on technology. We're really going to talk about this in categories. David, go to the next one there. We're not going to go deep here. We can go deeper in conversations if we want to set up a separate call. But I want to point out that there are some of these tools that you can use with an intelligent business analyst who gets studied up on the topic. And there are products from a variety of vendors. We do a lot of work with IBM, and IBM has products with Stored IQ, which does a lot of the rules-based classification. It also has another IBM product called Content Classification that has a limited use license built in that we can do all the machine learning. So there we get the rules and the machine learning. You've probably all heard of Watson, of course. There are other companies out there as well. So a few that we will mention here, CapEx and Nuix, and our own products, Integro, in particular, Integro Email Manager to auto-classify your email. Next, David. So now each of the next ones start to get where it's more of a gearhead thing, and we need more technical strength. Where you see a ton of the activity and where most of the R&D and where the momentum is going is here in this Google, Amazon, and Microsoft and the cloud. And they're doing some great things with auto classification, and there are others, by the way, but this is a category. But in the cloud, where they've got tools to be able to do auto classification up in the cloud. And so you're going to be using subscription kind of services. And again, you'll have to train the models and things like that. And so still strong business analysts are good, but you're going to need some more technical chops on the team as well. And then the next one is open source. In open source, there's a number of products. And by the way, these technologies really first came up within the 60s. And so they've been around a long time, and they're really hitting their stride. And why is it they're hitting their stride now? I'll tell you, there's two major factors that Chris McHenry, our VP of Technology, would share, is in order to make machine learning work really well, you need lots of data. And guess what? Today's day and age, we have lots of data. And B, you need lots of compute power. And today, we have a lot of computing power. And so now you can also just go out and download and use tools out in the open source world and build them for your own use cases. And that's a much more of a build your own, but start with their engine. Now let's go ahead, David, to the next thing there. And let's talk about those case studies. I think you're going to talk about a couple of them here first.
Absolutely. We've got about 3 minutes left, so we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. The first one, this is a financial services company. They had about 200 terabytes of data in their file shares in SharePoint, Exchange, and Box. It was kind of all over the place. And their approach was they used auto classification to manage the records. And the interesting thing about this company is they've come as close to getting big bucket retention down as anyone I've ever seen. They had 19 record categories that we trained the model to recognize. So we used that to identify the records. We isolated the PII. Specifically, we were looking for social security numbers. And then after they did that, then they deleted the rot. So this is a current project that's still going on, but currently we've identified about 24% of the content as records, and they took a very conservative approach to records identification. They were willing to get they wanted high recall, so they were willing to get those false positives to get more of the records. So high records, 15% of rot, and they just took they defined their rot as anything that hadn't been accessed in 7 years, so a pretty conservative approach there as well. So, and then we found just under 2% of PII. But this is a big data cleanup effort, and it's going very well.
Thanks, David. A lot of times we'll get much higher percentages of content to delete, but it just depends on companies and their content and rules. Keep going, David.
On the email management one, you want to go to?
Yeah, that one's yours, right?
Oh. Sure. You know what, Scott? I'm sorry. We have 2 case studies in this one. We took some out for time because we knew we weren't going to have. Yep.
Let me do email management. We've got a number of clients doing email management for auto classification, and we look at both their legacy content, so those archives with 1 billion emails or some hundreds of terabytes of emails, and the frustration with that and the desire to clean that content up. And so we're using, once we train the machine learning auto classification, we can use it for both the day forward email as email is received in each user's inbox, as well as we can crawl across the content at rest that has been received over the last 10 years and excessively saved. Companies have historically saved way too much email, and now they're faced with how do we clean up those archives. And so we do a lot of archive cleanup using these tools. And we've got one right now where it's really following a great model for day forward. We're rolling out the Integro email manager and having end users classify their email to the records categories, letting that run for 2 quarters or so, and then we're getting naturally a whole pre-tagged set of content that then we can use for training the model. So that helps wipe out that biggest cost and expense, which is the time to find the samples. Let's take a few
right, and I would just add really quick to that, Scott. Anything that you can do today to start gathering your samples or tagging content prior to starting the project, you'll give yourself a big head start.
Totally. In whatever you choose to do in the future, tag your content. So let's take questions. Are there any questions out there? And the way to do it is type it in, and then Kristen and I will read the questions and respond. So we do have a couple out there. We have a Randy that asked, is time the most underrated issue? Time is oftentimes the most expensive issue. How do I define underrated? I think underrated is having the right expectations and making the right business decisions in advance is the most underrated issue. The biggest challenge to getting this thing going is the investment of time and the upfront effort to train the knowledge base. But like I said, we're coming up with a lot of approaches that greatly reduces that for you, and we're working on a lot more that we think are exciting. Linda asked, how frequently are you deleting your emails? Well, good question. Every day. So at Integro, we take a zone approach where we have we classify emails that are records as records, and then they're going to be retained and disposed per the records retention schedule. If the individual user says, hey, I want to keep this around and refer back to it later, great. They can keep a size constrained amount of email for up to 2 years. And then everything else, which for me personally is about 84% of my email, is auto deleted at 6 months. And so all those things are policies, and then every day my email that's older than 6 months old, and David's and Kristen's, it just waterfalls off the back end. And so as long as I've tagged my emails as records or what I want to keep around, it lives right within my Office 365, and every day stuff that's 6 months in a day goes away. Good questions. Do we have any other questions out there? Hey, David, here's one for you. Somebody's asking that they have single file share with multiple languages within the system. So documents that are in multiple languages. Can we run the machine learning and the auto classification against that repository at once?
Absolutely. So yes, multiple languages do provide a challenge. So the tools that we use are smart enough to recognize different languages, English, French. I mean, there's 20 or 30 languages they support. So they can recognize that foreign content, but they're not smart enough to do the translation for you. So what that means is you have to create a model basically for each language that you want to operate in. So you have a Spanish model, an English model, a French model if you've got multilingual content. So it does increase your work training and creating the models, but it certainly is doable.
And interestingly, with technology nowadays, that may change in the future with all the translation services. A big challenge that we have in information governance, two of the big challenges. One is the volumes of content is huge. So even though we can use there's technologies out there that can really parse language and parts of speech and noun, subject, verb, predicate, and figure out what's acting on what, that takes a ton of compute. And so running that on the volumes that are email or things that we have to address in corporations today is too much, and it goes too slow. And I had another one that was right on top of that. It was the volumes of content, and my brain just left me. We have a Sue out there asking a question: can Integro do this type of project without draining my internal resources? Well, it depends on how many resources you have, but we can do it with a fairly light touch. But we will need some subject matter expertise and some engagement to understand your categories, help you make some business decisions as to which categories can be consolidated, and work with your subject matter experts. But we have a team of people that can come in and do a lot of this for you. But it's more with you, I think, is probably the way to answer it. Sue, I hope that answered your question well. All right, everybody, I think we're a few minutes over. We really, really appreciate your, I know how busy everybody is in today's age. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your precious time with us, and we hope that we added some value to your day. Thank you very much.